on Monday, we'll be treated to the farce of Boris Johnson's Conservative government amid all the full pomp and ceremony, setting out an agenda to Parliament that he has no intention and no obvious means of delivering, because this government isn't going to put any legislation before Parliament. It has a majority of minus 45. But there is one area where Boris Johnson has a 100% record, and I commend him for it. That is, he's been defeated on every vote he's put to Parliament since he became Prime Minister. And is seeking a general election which will rapidly end the parliamentary session that the Queen is about to open. Holding a Queen's speech before he's trying to call an election is a cynical stunt. He's using the Queen to deliver a pre-election party political broadcast for the Conservative Party. And it wasn't long ago that Johnson was pretending not to want an election. Now he's pretending that it's Labour doesn't want one. Let me address him directly. Prime Minister, we can't trust you not to break the law because you've got form. We can't trust you not to use this period of an election campaign to drive our country off a no-deal cliff edge that will crash our economy, destroy our jobs and industries, create shortages of medicine and food supplies, and endanger the peace process in Northern Ireland and damage the Good Friday Agreement. So it's simple. Obey the law, take no deal off the table, and then let's have the election. We're ready. We're ready. There is only one reason it hasn't happened yet. We can't trust you. We might just be weeks away from the first Queen's speech of a Labour government. And that Queen's speech will be very different. We'll put forward the most radical, hopeful, people-focused programme in modern times, a once-in-a-generation chance to rebuild and transform our country. It will let the people decide on Brexit, build an economy that works for all, change government so that it works for you, tackle the climate emergency, and reset our global role to one based on peace and human rights. So today, I want to give you a preview of Labour's plan for real change. The first task of a Labour government will be finally to get Brexit sorted. After 3 years of Tory failure, it's time to take a decision out of the hands of politicians and let the people have the final say. So a Labour government will immediately legislate for a referendum. That referendum will not be a rerun of 2016. No one knew what a deal with the EU would look like back then, and the prospect of no deal was dismissed out of hand by leaving lead campaigners, including Boris Johnson and Michael Gove at the time. This time, the choice will be between leaving with a sensible deal or remaining in the EU. Two clear options, both agreed with the EU. No false promises, no bluster. So within 3 months of coming to power, a Labour government will secure a sensible deal based on the terms we've long advocated and discussed with the European Union, trade unions and businesses, including a new customs union, a close single market relationship, and guarantees, absolute guarantees of rights and protections, and of course respect for the wonderful Good Friday Agreement that was reached. Within 6 months of being elected, we'll put that deal to a public vote alongside Remain. And as Prime Minister, I will carry out whatever the people decide. There's nothing complicated about that position. It's really very simple. Labour trusts the people to decide. Labour is the only party that can and will deliver a public vote. The Tories and the Lib Dems have taken increasingly extreme and frankly undemocratic positions that sow further divisions. Boris Johnson's Conservatives are pushing the country towards no deal, for which they have no mandate, which is opposed by most of the public, and which would open the way to a race to the bottom in our rights and protections to get a one-sided trade deal with Donald Trump. But Labour will get Brexit sorted and bring our country together, because years of bickering over Brexit has become a barrier to delivering the real change that this country needs. To do that, we need an economy that works for the many, not just the few at the top. Today's GDP figures show our economy is contracting. We're on the brink of recession. Productivity is down. People's living standards are lower today than they were 10 years ago. That's the Tory record. A Labour government will rebuild communities across Britain with investment on a scale our country has never known, bringing new jobs and fresh growth to every town, city and every region of England and all of the nations that make up the UK. We'll upgrade our creaking infrastructure with a £250 billion public investment into energy, housing and transport through a National Transformation Fund, and establish a national investment bank to make a further £250 billion available through loans to businesses and co-ops to get our economy moving. Grotesque inequality is not inevitable. It's a result of a deliberate effort to tip the balance of power away from workers towards the privileged elite that Boris Johnson's Conservatives represent. For too many people, work now means longer hours, more stress, and greater insecurity. Pay is still lower than it was a decade ago. The Chancellor, Sajid Javid, has said the minimum wage will not rise above £10 an hour until 2024, and only for those aged 21 and over. So a Labour government will immediately raise the minimum wage to £10 an hour for all workers from the age of 16 and will deliver the biggest extension of rights for workers our country has ever seen. We will create a new Ministry of Employment Rights and give workers a seat at the Cabinet table and strengthen the democratic voice of the workforce through collective bargaining. Every worker will have full rights on day one of a new job, entitling them to sick pay, holiday pay, parental leave and protection against unfair dismissal. A new Workers' Protection Agency will ensure all these rights are properly enforced. And we'll create a Working Time Commission to reduce the average full-time working hours to 32 a week within 10 years. And to truly rebalance power in people's lives, we need to go further. So Labour will give workers a say and a stake in their workplace by ensuring a third of the seats on company boards are reserved for worker directors elected by the workforce. And we'll require all large companies to create inclusive ownership funds, giving workers a share of the fruits of their labour by paying a dividend of up to £500 a year. Too much talent in our country is squandered, not through any fault of the individual, but because austerity has closed down opportunities for people. I believe the point of government is to do the opposite, to open up opportunities and allow everyone to reach their full potential. And that begins with education. The Tories have starved our schools of cash and, along with the Liberal Democrats, saddled a generation of young people with a lifelong debt burden. You know this yourselves from every school you go into. A Labour government will create a national education service, providing free education for everyone throughout life as a right to education, not a privilege to those that can afford it. So, we will scrap university tuition fees, give our schools the funding they need. And end the academies and free schools programme and bring all our schools into a democratically accountable system, the family of local education that can be achieved. We'll free young children from the unnecessary stress of over-testing by ending Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2 tests. And because we all know, early years are actually the most important time of your life. We will rebuild what was a great achievement of the last Labour government. That was Sure Start. introduce universal free childcare for all 2, 3 and 4-year-olds. So they get that great opportunity of socialising and learning together before they go on to school later on. For a decade, our National Health Service has been run down, carved up and diced up, ready for privatisation. A Labour government will reverse this process. We'll repeal the Tory Lib Dem Privatisation Act of 2012, otherwise known as the Health and Social Care Act. We'll give our NHS the resources and equipment and staff that it needs, which will mean more GPs and nurses and reduced waiting times. And under Labour, prescriptions in England will be free, as they already are in Wales and Scotland. And anyone that's been through the pain of friends or relatives that have got serious, life-threatening conditions, we're going to make life-saving medicines available to all by ensuring that Big Pharma, the biggest pharmaceutical companies, can no longer hold our NHS to ransom. The prices the companies demand don't reflect the costs of the drugs they make. They simply charge as much as they can get away with. So we'll use a compulsory licensing system to secure generic versions of patented medicines and create a publicly owned generic drugs manufacturer to supply cheaper medicines to our National Health Service, saving the health service money and saving lives and ensuring that medicines are available to all, because some are not and some can only be bought at enormous cost from elsewhere. Only Labour can be trusted with the future of our National Health Service. After all, we're the ones who created it. But health is other things as well. £8 billion has been taken from social care budgets of local authorities since 2010. Just reflect on that figure for a moment. £8 billion taken since 2010, only 9 years ago. 87 people die every day while waiting for the care they need. It's a disgrace, and frankly, that we treat older people in this way has to change and has to be addressed. And so, we will introduce free personal care, providing help with daily tasks like bathing, washing, and preparing meals. This will be the first step towards creating a national care service, easing the fear of getting older, but also the fear for the families who have to give up work, opportunities and so on in order to care for older relatives. They love them, but I believe care should be provided by the public as a whole and not force individuals, nearly always women, to give up jobs and careers in order to care for older people. Let's have some dignity in our society. And if I told you that our social security system has been deliberately removed and replaced with a harsh and uncaring ethos, you might think, well, that's Jeremy, he would say that, wouldn't he? But if I told you those aren't my words, but the damning verdict of the United Nations, no less, you get a sense of the damage wrought by 9 years of Tory austerity on the lives of people in this country. Their policy of universal credit pushes people into the jaws of loan sharks, forces proud women and men to depend on food banks, and turfs families out of their homes because of the debt they've been forced into by universal credit. The Tories promised it would make work pay. But more and more people are falling into poverty, actually have jobs. So we will change the whole culture of the DWP. It will become the Department for Social Security to give people dignity and respect. Social security shouldn't be about forcing women into the indignity of having to fill out a 4-page form to prove their child was born as a result of rape. 500 women had to do that last year. So, Labour will scrap universal credit and introduce an emergency package to immediately end its worst aspects, ending the benefit cap and what I believe to be the immoral two-child limit, and will stop what has now become 300,000 children being pushed into poverty by this system. And yes, that means the end of the disgusting rape clause as well. We'll end the 5-week wait for the first payment and end the Tories' vicious sanctions regime, and with it, the bedroom tax, because we're committed to reducing poverty. And because of our commitment to reducing poverty, we will end the benefit freeze, which has damaged so many people's lives. But we'll control welfare spending by tackling low pay and insecure work and the rip-off rents. That is where the poverty comes from. Low pay, high rents, and the freeze on benefits. That is a serious situation we will address. Social security shouldn't be subsidising bad employers and greedy landlords. Labour sees a decent home as a right owed to all, not a privilege for the few. So, we'll build 1 million genuinely affordable homes over 10 years, the majority for social rent, with the biggest council house building programme in a generation. And let me say this, today, World Homeless Day. In the 5th richest country in the world, no one should be forced to sleep rough. We all know it's wrong, and it's Labour that will end rough sleeping. After the horror of Grenfell, it's astonishing that the Tories are still failing to make our tower blocks safe. 9 out of 10 private blocks with Grenfell-style cladding haven't had it replaced yet. Grenfell happened in 2017. We will ensure that people aren't living in death traps and will deliver justice for Grenfell. They've suffered for too long. Under the Tories, our communities have become less safe. Violent crime has doubled, as Diane has explained often in Parliament. Think about that the next time you see the Prime Minister using police recruits as a backdrop for his latest election gimmick. A Labour government will increase the number of uniformed officers, PCSOs and police staff. But we know that police cuts are not the only reason that violent crime has doubled. It's also the wider impact of austerity, including the closure of youth centres, 750 of which have closed their doors since 2012, 7 years ago. Too many young people today are growing up with nowhere to go and no one to speak about their lives. I was in a youth centre last week in London. It was a lovely youth centre, brilliantly done, and the sense of creativity and imagination that was there in that centre, and the young people told me how much they valued it, and it opened their horizons and eyes to things they could do in their lives when they went there each evening after school. I want that kind of youth centre for every young person in every part of this country, including Northamptonshire, which has had so many closed. This isn't just about crime. The experiences of our youth can shape our entire lives. It should be a time to discover arts, enjoy sport and develop friendships. So we will guarantee every young person access to youth services in their community. That is the Labour pledge for young people in our society. Women have borne the brunt of Tory austerity, turning back the clock on gender equality. Labour will put women right at the heart of our programme for government, creating a standalone department for women and equalities to ensure gender equality is prioritised. Labour is the party of equality. We'll bear down on sexism, racism, homophobia and all forms of discrimination wherever they exist in our economy and in our society. And we will deliver justice for the victims of the Windrush scandal, those wonderful people that came to this country. Diane is the daughter of the Windrush generation. And have done so much to enrich our lives and deliver us healthcare and so many other things. It's disgraceful the way they were treated by Theresa May and the Tories. Yesterday, the sickening anti-Semitic attack on a synagogue in Germany is a truly terrifying reminder of where hatred and racism ultimately leads to. So, we stand together as a society, as a community, against racism in any form whatsoever, be it the far right, anti-Semitism or Islamophobia. We will not tolerate it in any form in our society. We can all be united on that, I hope. Many of the measures I'm outlining today will be delivered at the local level by local councils. But local councils and local services have been gutted by the Tory government with Lib Dems support since 2010. The ultimate symbol of that is right here in Northamptonshire. Conservative-run council collapsed. Well, I'll just put it simply. A Labour government will properly fund councils and local services and restore that sense of place and pride that comes from having good local facilities and a thriving, lively high street, not a place of roller-blind shutters and closed businesses. And the same goes for the vital basic services we all rely on, which have been carved up and often fleeced by their private owners. The privatisation of our utilities, which are natural monopolies, has been a failure. People are sick of paying through the nose for a poor service, while billions are handed over to shareholders. So, Labour will bring rail, mail, water and the energy grid into public ownership. Public ownership run by and for the public, not for profit. And a Labour government will take the railways back into public ownership. We'll invest in public transport, including Crossrail for the north, from Liverpool to Hull and up to Newcastle. And we'll reinstate bus routes and establish municipal companies making free bus travel available for the under-25s while maintaining the pensioners' bus pass. Buses are a crucial part of our lives and our communities, and actually more people use buses than trains in the total number of journeys. Our public transport network is falling apart just when the climate emergency means we need it more than ever. If we're to have any hope of keeping global temperature rises to a manageable level, we need immediate and radical action. And I want to thank groups like the Climate Strikers and Extinction Rebellion for educating us and pushing this issue to the top of the agenda. The government's target of reaching net zero emissions by 2050 is too late, and the Tories are doing little to meet it. In fact, investment in clean energy has fallen now for 3 years running. A Labour government is fully signed up to a Green New Deal. We're already working closely with trade unions and the scientific community to develop the most radical climate targets in the world. In government, we'll entrench this into law by updating the Labour government's great achievement of the Climate Change Act, which Ed Miliband pushed through, with the most ambitious feasible net zero deadline consistent with a just transition for workers. The urgent need to reduce our emissions is the starting point for the green industrial revolution. We will unleash it in every part of our country, creating hundreds of thousands of good, skilled jobs across Britain and building the cleaner, healthier, more rewarding economy for the future. Yesterday, I visited a state-of-the-art wind turbine facility at Fawley near Southampton to discuss our plans for a 5-fold increase in the UK's offshore wind capacity. That alone will create 70,000 jobs. That's the kind of ambition we need, the ambition we need that will ensure we reach our targets and make our contribution to saving our planet. Under our plan, the public will take a 51% stake in the new offshore wind farms and will reinvest those profits in coastal communities and in other green measures. And the local communities will decide how that money is spent. And, let's be clear, Labour will ban fracking in this country. And we'll roll out a street-by-street insulation programme and fit solar panels to 1.75 million roofs, double large-scale solar electricity sources, and remove the unnecessary barriers that are often there for onshore wind, and ensure every single new house built is a zero-carbon home. The climate emergency is actually an issue of global security. And like other global issues, it demands cooperation and diplomacy. The invasion of northern Syria by Turkey is completely unacceptable. More violence is never the solution. To end war, you have to make peace, which is what all sides should do now. The Syrian peace process must mean peace and security for the Kurdish people too, whose voice must be included and heard. Reckless military interventions have made Britain and the world a more dangerous place. The wars in Iraq, Afghanistan and Libya, frankly, have been disastrous failures that have devastated those countries and fueled terrorism and insecurity rather than opposing it. Currently, the Prime Minister has the power under the royal prerogative to launch military action without recourse to Parliament. Boris Johnson, a Prime Minister without a majority, has talked about sending troops to Saudi Arabia to confront Iran. Another disaster in the making. I tell you this, I would be a very different kind of Prime Minister. One who is prepared to limit my own powers in the public interest. That's why a Labour government would introduce a War Powers Bill to ensure no Prime Minister can bypass Parliament to take our country to war. The alternative Queen's speech I've set out today, not in the grandeur of the House of Lords, but in the beauty of the Saints Rugby Club. And what I've set out is the most transformative, radical and exciting programme ever put before the British electorate. This is Labour's plan to change our country. It's the real thing, not the pale imitation offered by Boris Johnson and his Tory party. It's a path to a future where the economy is run for the people, not the privileged few, and a government that works for you, not the vested interests. A future where we tackle the climate emergency, and Britain is a force for peace and international justice in the world. That future is within our grasp. Together, we can build a country fit for the next generation. The future is ours to make. Friends, it's time for real change. Thank you.